A millionaire, disguised as a regular customer, was thrown out of his own restaurant. But when he saw who was secretly running the place, everything changed. Ethan Shaw stood at the entrance of his flagship restaurant, the Golden Spoon, his designer suit replaced by worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. His normally perfectly coiffed hair was hidden beneath a baseball cap, and a few days' worth of stubble adorned his chin. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The maitre d', Ryan Cooper, approached with a raised eyebrow. "Can I help you, sir?" Ethan cleared his throat, adopting a gruff voice. "Table for one, please." Ryan's lips curled into a sneer. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the diner down the street." Ethan bristled, his hands clenching into fists. "I'd like to speak to the manager." "I am the manager on duty, and I've made my decision. Good evening." Ryan turned on his heel, leaving Ethan fuming at the door. As he watched Ryan saunter away, Ethan's mind raced. This was worse than he'd imagined. How had his restaurant, his pride and joy, become a haven for such elitism? He slipped around the side of the building, finding a spot near the kitchen entrance where he could observe without being seen. The back door swung open, and a woman in chef's whites hurried out, phone pressed to her ear. "No, Mom, I can't make it tonight. We're short-staffed, and I need to cover for Jake. His kid's sick again." She paused, listening. I know. I'll try to stop by tomorrow, okay? Love you." As she hung up, Ethan recognized her face. Grace Mitchell, the head chef he'd hired years ago. He'd forgotten how young she was, how determined she'd looked during that interview. Grace took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and headed back inside. Ethan followed, slipping through the door before it closed. The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. Pots clanged, knives chopped, and orders were called out in rapid succession. At the center of it all stood Grace, her voice rising above the chaos. "Carlos, how's that risotto coming?" "Jenny, I need those vegetables blanched yesterday." "Let's go, people." Despite the frenetic pace, there was an underlying warmth to the interactions. Grace moved from station to station, offering encouragement and gentle corrections. The staff responded with genuine smiles and focused determination. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, trying to blend in. He watched as Grace tasted a sauce, her brow furrowing. "It needs something," she muttered. A young line cook approached, nervously offering a small bowl. "Chef, I tried adding a bit of lemon zest. What do you think?" Grace's eyes lit up as she tasted it. "Brilliant, Max. That's exactly what it needed. Well done." The cook beamed, returning to his station with renewed energy. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. When was the last time he'd offered that kind of encouragement to anyone? As the night wore on, Ethan marveled at the efficiency and camaraderie in the kitchen. The food leaving the pass looked exquisite, a stark contrast to the dismissive treatment he'd received at the door. When the last ticket was called, Grace gathered her team. "Great job tonight, everyone. I know we were short-staffed, but you all stepped up. I'm proud of you." The staff dispersed, chatting and laughing as they cleaned up. Grace stayed behind, meticulously checking inventory and prepping for the next day. Ethan slipped out, his mind reeling. He needed answers, and he knew just where to start. The next morning, he strode into his office, startling his assistant. "Sarah, I need everything we have on Grace Mitchell. Her application, performance reviews, everything." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Of course, Mr. Shaw. Right away." As he waited, Ethan paced his office, unable to shake the image of Grace in the kitchen. How had he become so disconnected from the heart of his own business? Sarah returned with a slim file. "This is all we have, sir. It's not much." Ethan flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. Grace's application was sparse, listing only a high school education and a series of entry-level kitchen jobs. Her references were glowing, but came from small, local restaurants. "This can't be right," Ethan muttered. "She's running our flagship kitchen. There must be more." He picked up his phone, dialing a number he rarely used. "Laura, it's Ethan. I need your help." His sister's voice was warm but wary. "Well, this is a surprise. What's going on, Ethan?" "I need you to look into someone for me, discreetly. Her name is Grace Mitchell, and she works at the Golden Spoon." Laura's tone sharpened. "Ethan, what are you up to? You're not trying to get rid of someone, are you?" "No, nothing like that. I need to know more about her. Please, Laura. It's important." There was a long pause before Laura sighed. "All right, I'll see what I can find out. But Ethan, whatever this is about, be careful. Don't do anything rash." Ethan hung up, his mind racing. He needed to understand how Grace had risen through the ranks so quickly, how she'd created such a positive atmosphere in a restaurant plagued by complaints. As he waited for Laura's call, Ethan found himself drawn back to the Golden Spoon. He watched from across the street as Grace arrived, greeting the prep cooks with a warm smile. She paused to help an elderly woman navigate the curb, then disappeared inside. His phone buzzed. "Laura, what did you find?" His sister's voice was soft. "Ethan, you might want to sit down for this." As Laura spoke, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Grace Mitchell, the powerhouse running his kitchen, had once been homeless. She'd started at the Golden Spoon as a dishwasher, working her way up through sheer determination and talent. "There's more," Laura continued. "She volunteers at a shelter twice a week, teaching cooking classes. And she's put 3 of her staff through culinary school on her own dime." Ethan's throat tightened. "I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Laura said gently. "When was the last time you really looked at the people working for you, Ethan? When did you stop seeing them as people and start seeing them as assets?" The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He mumbled a goodbye to Laura and sank onto a nearby bench, his head in his hands. He'd built his empire from nothing, just like Grace. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of what truly mattered: the humanity, the passion, the connection to the work, and the people doing it. As he watched the Golden Spoon's doors open for the day, Ethan made a decision. He would fix this, no matter the cost. But first, he needed to have a conversation with his general manager, Brandon Cross. Ethan straightened his cap and headed for the restaurant's back entrance. It was time to face the music and rediscover the values he'd left behind in his pursuit of success. Ethan's heart raced as he approached Brandon Cross's office. The plush carpet muffled his footsteps, but each step felt like a thunderclap in his ears. He paused at the door, hand hovering over the polished brass handle. "Mr. Shaw." Brandon's voice boomed from inside. Come in. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Ethan stepped into the opulent office, taking in the leather chairs and the view of the city skyline. Brandon lounged behind his desk, a self-satisfied smile plastered across his face. "Brandon, we need to talk about the Golden Spoon." Brandon's smile faltered for a moment before returning, wider and more artificial than before. "Of course, sir. Our flagship is performing admirably. Profits are up 15% this quarter alone." Ethan's jaw clenched. "And what about the complaints? The staff turnover?" "Minor issues, I assure you. Nothing we can't handle." Brandon waved a dismissive hand. "In fact, I've been meaning to discuss some cost-cutting measures that could boost our margins even further." As Brandon launched into a detailed explanation of labor reductions and cheaper ingredients, Ethan's mind wandered back to the kitchen. He saw Grace's determined face, heard the laughter of her team. How could he have let things get this far? "Brandon, stop." Ethan's voice cut through the air like a knife. "I've seen enough. Your approach is destroying everything we've built." Brandon's facade cracked, revealing a flash of anger. "With all due respect, Mr. Shaw, you haven't been involved in day-to-day operations for years. I've kept this ship afloat while you've been otherwise occupied." The accusation stung, but Ethan knew it held a grain of truth. He'd allowed himself to become detached, focused on expansion and profits rather than the people who made it all possible. "You're right, Brandon. I haven't been as involved as I should have been, but that changes now." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "I want a full audit of our practices, starting with the Golden Spoon, and I'll be overseeing it personally." Brandon's face paled. Mr. Shaw, I really don't think that's necessary. We have protocols in place dash. Protocols that allowed our maitre d' to turn away customers based on appearance, that prioritize profit over the well-being of our staff. Ethan shook his head. No, Brandon, this ends now. As Ethan turned to leave, Brandon called out, his voice tinged with desperation. You can't do this. I've given everything to this company. Without me, you'd still be flipping burgers in that greasy spoon downtown. Ethan paused at the door, a sad smile playing at his lips. Maybe that wouldn't have been such a bad thing. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Ethan immersed himself in the workings of the Golden Spoon, observing every aspect of its operation. He watched as Ryan Cooper continued to alienate customers, saw the strain on the faces of the wait staff, and marveled at the resilience of Grace's kitchen team. On the third day, as the lunch rush wound down, Ethan approached Grace. She was wiping down a stainless steel counter, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen. Excuse me, Chef Mitchell, do you have a moment? Grace looked up, surprise flickering across her features. Of course. How can I help you, Mr. Smith? Jon Smith. The lie tasted bitter on Ethan's tongue. I represent a new restaurant opening across town. We've heard great things about your work here, and I was hoping to discuss a potential opportunity with you. Grace's eyebrows rose. I'm flattered, Mr. Smith, but I'm not looking for a new position. I understand, but I think you'll want to hear me out. Ethan leaned in, lowering his voice. We're prepared to offer you twice your current salary, full creative control of the menu, and a stake in the business. For a moment, Grace's eyes widened with interest. Then, just as quickly, she shook her head. I appreciate the offer truly, but my place is here. Ethan frowned, genuinely puzzled. But surely you must be frustrated with the management here. The way they treat customers, the cost-cutting measures. Grace's expression hardened. Those are challenges, yes. But this team, these people, they're my family. I won't abandon them. As Grace turned back to her work, Ethan felt a surge of admiration and shame. He'd been so focused on the bottom line that he'd forgotten what truly mattered. That evening, as the last customers filtered out of the dining room, Ethan made his way to Brandon's office. The general manager looked up from his computer, his face a mask of forced politeness. Mr. Shaw, what can I do for you? Ethan took a deep breath. Brandon, I've made a decision. We're going to be making some significant changes to our operations, starting with the Golden Spoon. Brandon's smile faltered. Changes? What kind of changes? We're going to refocus on quality over quantity. No more cutting corners on ingredients. We'll be implementing a new training program for front-of-house staff, emphasizing customer service and inclusivity. Ethan paused, steeling himself for what came next. And we'll be restructuring our management team. The color drained from Brandon's face. You can't be serious. After everything I've done for this company dash, I am serious, Brandon, and I'm sorry, but your services will no longer be required. Brandon's composure shattered. He leapt to his feet, face contorted with rage. You ungrateful bastard. I made you rich. I turned this place into a gold mine. At what cost, Brandon? Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. We've lost sight of what matters. It's time to get back to our roots. As Brandon continued to rant, hurling insults and threats, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the Golden Spoon before dawn. He watched as the prep cooks filtered in, followed by Grace and her team. The kitchen came alive with the sounds of chopping, sizzling, and good-natured banter. As Grace tied on her apron, Ethan approached. Chef Mitchell, may I have a word? Grace nodded, leading him to a quiet corner of the kitchen. What can I do for you, Mrs. Smith? Ethan took a deep breath. First, I owe you an apology. My name isn't Jon Smith. I'm Ethan Shaw, the owner of this restaurant. Grace's eyes widened, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I've been absent for far too long. I lost sight of what made this place special. But watching you and your team these past few days has reminded me of what truly matters." Ethan paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm making some changes around here. Brandon crosses out, and I'd like to offer you a partnership in the business. Your leadership, your values, they're exactly what we need." Grace's expression was unreadable. "Mr. Shaw, please call me Ethan." A small smile played at the corners of Grace's mouth. "Ethan, I appreciate the offer, but I have to ask, why the charade? Why not just come to me directly?" Ethan felt his face flush with shame. "Honestly, I didn't trust anyone. I thought I needed to see things for myself, undercover. But I realize now that was a mistake. I should have had faith in the people who make this place what it is." Grace nodded slowly. "And what about the rest of the staff? What changes can they expect?" "Better wages, for a start, improved benefits, and a complete overhaul of our customer service policies." Ethan's voice grew more animated as he spoke. "I want to create an environment where everyone feels valued, staff and customers alike." Grace's smile widened. "That sounds like the kind of place I'd be proud to be a part of." As they shook hands, sealing their new partnership, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but with Grace by his side and a renewed sense of purpose, he was ready to face them. The kitchen bustled around them, a symphony of culinary creation. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt truly at home in his own restaurant. The Golden Spoon hummed with renewed energy. Ethan stood at the entrance, watching as Grace expertly guided her team through the dinner rush. The kitchen moved like a well-oiled machine, a stark contrast to the chaos of just a few weeks ago. But all was not well. Ryan Cooper, the maitre d', still prowled the dining room like a shark in shallow waters. His sneers and dismissive gestures sent ripples of discomfort through the patrons. Ethan's jaw clenched. He dealt with Brandon, but Ryan remained a thorn in his side. The man's elitist attitude was poison to everything Ethan and Grace were trying to build. "Mr. Shaw." A waiter approached, wringing his hands. "There's been a situation." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What kind of situation?" Mr. Cooper turned away a group of customers. "They're outside now, demanding to speak with management." Ethan strode out the front door, his heart pounding. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, their faces a mix of anger and embarrassment. A woman stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Are you in charge here?" Ethan nodded, bracing himself. "I'm Ethan Shaw, the owner. I understand there's been a misunderstanding, Misunderstanding." The woman's laugh was bitter. "Your pompous maitre d' took one look at my son's wheelchair and told us you don't serve that kind here." The blood drained from Ethan's face. He looked past the woman to see a young man in a wheelchair, his expression a mixture of hurt and resignation. "I'm deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable." Ethan's mind raced. How could he make this right? "Please come inside. I'll personally ensure you have the best table in the house." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Why should we give you our business after being treated like that?" Ethan took a deep breath. "You shouldn't, but I'm asking for a chance to show you what the Golden Spoon is really about. The food, the service, it's all on the house tonight." A murmur ran through the crowd. The woman exchanged glances with her son, who gave a small nod. "All right, Mr. Shaw, one chance." As Ethan led the group inside, he caught Ryan's eye. The maitre d' stood rigid, his face a mask of disdain. "Ryan, my office. Now." The confrontation was brief and explosive. Ryan's excuses fell on deaf ears as Ethan stripped him of his position on the spot. "But sir, our reputation Ethan's voice was ice. "Our reputation is built on how we treat people, Ryan. All people. You're done here." As Ryan stormed out, Ethan slumped in his chair. The victory felt hollow. He'd removed a symptom, but the disease ran deeper. How many others like Ryan still lurked in his restaurants, poisoning everything with their prejudice? A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Grace entered, her face etched with concern. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Ethan shook his head. "I thought fixing things with Brandon was enough. But this, it's like pulling weeds. You think you've got them all, and more keep popping up." Grace perched on the edge of his desk. "Change takes time, Ethan. You can't undo years of toxic culture overnight." "But how do I fix it, Grace? How do I make sure nothing like this ever happens again?" Grace's eyes lit up. "I might have an idea." Over the next hour, they hatched a plan. It was risky, potentially disastrous for the restaurant's reputation. But as Grace laid out the details, Ethan felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. The next morning, Ethan called staff meeting. The dining room buzzed with nervous energy as employees from every level gathered. Ethan stood before them, his heart racing. "I've made a decision. For the next month, the Golden Spoon will be closed for renovations." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan held up his hand for silence. "But we won't be idle. Instead, we'll be volunteering at local shelters and community centers. We'll serve meals, teach cooking classes, and learn what it means to truly connect with people from all walks of life." The room erupted in a mix of confusion and excitement. Ethan pressed on. "When we reopen, it won't just be with a new menu or decor. We'll have a new mission: to create a space where everyone, regardless of background or circumstance, feels welcome and valued." As the meeting dispersed, Ethan caught snippets of conversation. Some were enthusiastic, others skeptical. But the seed had been planted. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan worked alongside his staff, serving meals at homeless shelters and teaching cooking classes to at-risk youth. He watched as hardened-line cooks softened, sharing laughs with shelter residents over shared meals. Front-of-house staff who once turned up their noses at undesirable customers now sat and listened to the stories of those they served. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some employees quit, unwilling to adapt to the new direction. Others struggled to let go of old prejudices. Ethan found himself having difficult conversations, challenging long-held beliefs and confronting his own biases. Through it all, Grace was his rock. Her unwavering compassion and leadership inspired the team to push through the tough days. As the reopening approached, Ethan's anxiety grew. Would their gamble pay off? Or had he just torpedoed his flagship restaurant? The night before the grand reopening, Ethan found himself alone in the kitchen. He ran his hand along the gleaming countertops, remembering the chaos and beauty he'd witnessed here just weeks ago. A noise at the door made him turn. Grace stood there, a small smile on her face. Nervous. Ethan laughed, the sound tinged with hysteria. Terrified. What if this all backfires? What if we open the doors and no one comes? Grace crossed the room, placing a hand on his arm. Then we'll figure it out together. But Ethan, what you've done here, it's incredible. You've given people hope, a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves. Ethan met her gaze, seeing the strength and conviction that had first drawn him to her. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grace. You showed me what I'd forgotten, that a restaurant is more than just food and profit. It's about people, community." Grace's smile widened. "Well, then, let's show the world what the Golden Spoon is really made of." As they stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of kitchen equipment, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. Whatever happened tomorrow, he knew they were on the right path. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Ethan stood at the entrance, his heart pounding as he watched the staff arrive. Their faces were a mix of excitement and nervousness, mirroring his own emotions. As the doors opened, Ethan held his breath. Would anyone come? The answer came in a flood of familiar faces. The woman and her son in the wheelchair. Shelter residents they'd served meals to. Young people from the cooking classes. They poured in, filling the dining room with laughter and chatter. Ethan moved through the crowd, greeting old friends and new. He caught glimpses of his staff, their faces alight with genuine smiles as they welcomed guests. In the kitchen, Grace orchestrated a symphony of flavors, her team working in perfect harmony. The food that emerged was a reflection of their journey. Comfort dishes elevated with new techniques, street food reimagined with high-end ingredients. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself at the bar, taking a moment to breathe. Laura appeared at his side, a proud smile on her face. "Well, little brother, looks like you pulled off." Ethan chuckled. "We pulled off. I couldn't have done this without your support, Laura." She squeezed his arm. "You've changed, Ethan. For the better. Dad would be proud." As Laura moved away to chat with some guests, Ethan's gaze swept the room. The Golden Spoon buzzed with life, a melting pot of cultures and backgrounds united by good food and warm hospitality. In that moment, Ethan realized that his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The real work lay ahead, maintaining this spirit of inclusivity, continuing to grow and learn. But as he watched Grace emerge from the kitchen, her face flushed with success, he knew he was ready for the challenge. Together, they would write a new chapter for the Golden Spoon, one of compassion, community, and culinary excellence. Ethan raised his glass in a silent toast to new beginnings, second chances, and the power of a shared meal to bring people together. The Golden Spoon buzzed with energy as the dinner service wound down. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Grace orchestrate the final orders of the night. Her calm demeanor and steady hand had guided the team through another successful evening. As the last plate left the pass, Ethan cleared his throat. "Grace, can I have a word?" She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course, Mr. Shaw." They retreated to the small office, tucked away in the back of the kitchen. Ethan's heart raced as he closed the door behind them. "Grace, I need to come clean about something." Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Ethan took a deep breath. "The other day, when I came in disguised as a customer, that wasn't the first time I'd done that." Grace's lips quirked into a small smile. "I know." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. You knew." She nodded, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "From the moment you walked through the door, your disguise might fool others, but I remember the man who gave me a chance all those years ago." Ethan sank into a chair, his mind reeling. "Why didn't you say anything?" Grace leaned against the desk, her expression softening. "Because you needed to see it for yourself. The good and the bad. I couldn't just tell you what was wrong. You had to experience it." A wave of shame washed over Ethan. "I've been so blind, Grace. I let success go to my head, forgot what it was like in the trenches." "It happens to the best of us," Grace said gently. "The important thing is that you recognized it and want to make a change." Ethan nodded, determination setting in. "I do, and I want to start by offering you a partnership in the business." Grace's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Shaw, please call me Ethan." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "You're the heart and soul of this place, Grace. Your leadership, your values, they're exactly what we need to turn things around." For a moment, Grace was silent, her brow furrowed in thought. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she shook her head. "I'm honored, truly, but I can't accept." Ethan felt his heart sink. "But why? You deserve this, Grace. After everything you've done, It's not about what I deserve," Grace interrupted gently. "It's about what this place needs. And right now, it needs me in the kitchen with my team. That's where I can do the most good." Ethan sat back, stunned. He'd been so sure this was the right move, the perfect solution. But as he looked at Grace, he saw the conviction in her eyes, the quiet strength that had drawn him to her in the first place. I don't understand," he admitted. Grace smiled, a warm, genuine expression that lit up her face. "Ethan, when I started here, I was just grateful for a job. But over the years, these people have become my family. The kitchen is my home. I won't abandon them, no matter how tempting the offer." As her words sank in, Ethan felt a shift inside himself. The last vestiges of his old, profit-driven mindset crumbled away, replaced by a newfound respect for the woman standing before him. "You're right," he said softly. "I've been approaching this all wrong. Throwing money at the problem isn't the answer." Grace nodded encouragingly. "So what is the answer?" Ethan stood, pacing the small office as his mind raced. We need to change the culture from the ground up. No more toxic management, no more prioritizing profits over people. He turned to Grace, his eyes alight with purpose. Will you help me? Not as a partner, but as an advisor, someone to keep me grounded, to remind me of what's really important. Grace's smile widened. Now that I can do. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Grace worked tirelessly to implement changes throughout the Golden Spoon. They revamped training programs, focusing on empathy and inclusivity. They introduced profit sharing for employees and established a mentorship program to help entry-level staff climb the ranks. But their biggest challenge came in the form of Brandon Cross. The general manager bristled at every new policy, fighting Ethan at every turn. It all came to a head one evening during a particularly busy service. Brandon stormed into the kitchen, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, waving a handful of receipts. "We're hemorrhaging money with these new policies. If we don't cut costs somewhere, we'll be out of business in a month." The kitchen fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Brandon, that's enough. We need to talk in private." They retreated to the office, leaving a tense atmosphere in their wake. Grace exchanged worried glances with her team before returning to work, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Inside the office, Brandon paced like a caged animal. "You're running this place into the ground, Shaw. All these feel-good policies might make you sleep better at night, but they're killing our bottom line." Ethan leaned against the desk, his expression unreadable. "Is that all that matters to you, Brandon? The bottom line? It's all that should matter." Brandon exploded. "We're not a charity, we're a business." "We're more than that," Ethan said quietly. "We're a community, a family, and families take care of each other." Brandon scoffed. "Save the hallmark sentiment for someone who cares. I'm telling you, if we don't make some serious changes, Dash." "You're right," Ethan interrupted. "We do need to make a change. Brandon, you're fired." The words hung in the air between them. Brandon's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, a sneering contempt. "You'll regret this, Shaw. Mark my words." As Brandon stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. We emerged from the office. The kitchen was abuzz with whispers. Grace approached, concern etched on her face. "Everything okay?" Ethan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "It will be. We've got some work to do, but we're going to make this place something special, together." Over the following months, the Golden Spoon underwent a transformation. Word spread about their new approach, drawing in customers curious to see what all the fuss was about. They were greeted by a warm, inclusive atmosphere and food that spoke of passion and care. One evening, as Ethan made his rounds through the dining room, he overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. "I can't believe this is the same place," a woman was saying to her companion. "Remember how stuffy and unwelcoming it used to be?" Her friend nodded enthusiastically. "It's like a completely different restaurant. The food is even better than before, if that's possible." Ethan felt a surge of pride as he continued his circuit. He paused at the kitchen door, watching Grace in her element. She moved with purpose and grace, guiding her team with a firm but gentle hand. As the night wound down, Ethan found himself back in the small office, this time joined by Grace and Laura. His sister beamed at him, pride shining in her eyes. "I have to admit, little brother, I had my doubts, but you've really turned this place around." Ethan shook his head, a humble smile on his face. "I didn't do it alone. Grace, the staff, they're the real heroes here." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Don't sell yourself short, Ethan. Your willingness to change, to listen and learn, that made all the difference." As they sat there, sharing a quiet moment amidst the bustle of the restaurant, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. He thought back to the man he'd been just a few months ago, driven by profit, disconnected from the very people who made his success possible. "You know," he said softly, I always thought success was measured in dollars and cents. But now I see it's so much more than that. It's about the lives we touch, the community we build." Laura squeezed his hand. "Dad would be proud, Ethan. This is what he always wanted for you. Not just success, but fulfillment." As they raised a toast to new beginnings, Ethan caught Grace's eye. In that moment, he saw reflected in her gaze the values he'd rediscovered: compassion, integrity, and a genuine love for the work they did. The golden spoon hummed around them, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together with a common purpose. Ethan knew there would be challenges ahead, but with Grace by his side and his newfound perspective, he was ready to face whatever came their way. As they stepped out of the office and back into the heart of the restaurant, Ethan felt a surge of gratitude for second chances, for unexpected mentors, and for the simple power of a shared meal to bring people together. The kitchen doors swung open, and the sounds and smells of another busy night washed over them. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, ready to dive back in. There was work to be done, lives to touch, and a legacy to build.